Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video that ended up piquing my interest. But before I overall end up getting into the video, I did overall want to thank all the most recent subscribers and recent commentators and recent people who have liked and commented on the videos. I certainly do appreciate you guys very, very much. I also did want to say that, of course, I did put a poll out there to maybe see all in all what I should change my name to. And if I do end up changing my name, which I'm not 100% for sure on it yet, more than likely it'll end up being either Boxing Realist or maybe somewhat of the same name, just, some letters changed around, but we'll see all in all what ends up happening. Just overall to let you guys know, just in case you look at the channel and you say overall, who is this guy? I don't know this name. So just overall to put that news out there. But anyways, when it comes down to it, just to talk overall about this little video that I found very particularly interesting. This is going to be a video by Mr. BOXINGEGO, and basically he's going to be talking about something that apparently Mr. Canelo Alvarez had posted, I believe, on his Instagram. And I don't usually, all in all, review videos when it comes to people posting on their Instagram or Instagram posts because I'm not usually too interested in that. I don't think that there's really much to delve into that usually. But I thought that this would be very interesting to talk about because I actually had to agree with Mr. Canelo Alvarez, because Canelo, he basically, I think, has realized that if you are going to be the king in the sport of boxing, that even though there is going to be a certain amount of people that love you and overall are for you, there's also going to be a certain amount of people that conspire against you and a certain amount of people that do not like you. And if you're a person all in all that actually views yourself as the best at something or the king at something, more than likely you're going to have a certain amount of people that not only love you, but a certain amount of people that hate you. In fact, you may actually have more people that hate you than what love you, because a lot of people are really threatened by that type of power. It just is what it is. Most people, when they take a look at someone, whether it be someone in highly great power, no matter what it be, they don't usually like them. And it's not usually the fact that they think that they're doing something wrong or this or that. The majority of the time it's just because they don't like you having that type of power. And they wish overall that they were you. They wish overall that they could have that type of power. And a certain amount of overall these channels like BOXINGEGO, they wish all in all like someone like a Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. was ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter because they're somewhat jealous of Canelo to a certain degree. They live vicariously through these fighters like a Terrence Bud Crawford, like an Errol Spence Jr. What does that mean to live through someone vicariously? Basically what that means is that almost as if a father or a mother may live through their son or daughter and may force them to do sports or force them to do something that they wish they could do. Kind of like how, a father may get their sons into professional boxing because once upon a time they wanted to be the best fighter in the world. It's kind of the same thing here. Certain people that live vicariously through their fighters and they hope all in all that they do the best that they can do. That's why so many of these guys, they were cheering for Deontay Wilder. They were cheering for Deontay Wilder so hard because they live vicariously through these fighters. They want them somewhat to be what they wish they could be. They wish that they could be Deontay Wilder. They wish overall that they could be Gervonta Tank Davis and Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. So when they see someone like a Canelo Alvarez, they say, why is this guy ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter? I don't like that when it comes down to we need to have someone with our own complexion as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. And that's the reason why you see so many narratives against Canelo Alvarez. But anyways, we're going to see what Mr. BOXINGEGO has to say. Let's get into it.
Canelo Alvarez admits that if he doesn't fight Jermall Charlo, people will have a problem. He says he loves it and basically says people will always find a reason to, quote-unquote, hate on him. We're going to explore this topic.
Well, I agree with Mr. Canelo Alvarez because when you're the king of boxing or you're looked at as the king of a profession or someone of high-grade power, no one's going to like you. Or I'm not going to say no one is going to like you, but there's going to be a lot of people that, overall don't like you. Even some of the most beloved leaders or certain people in the past that were looked at as all-time great leaders, all-time great generals, like Julius Caesar, for example. Now, I'm not sure necessarily how beloved he was, but eventually, all in all, he was looked at as a very, very good leader of the Romans, I believe, if I'm remembering my history correct. And eventually, his own Senate even overall assassinated him. So at the end of the day, like I said, someone with a high degree of power, they're always going to be looked at as a great threat. And at the current moment in time, there is no bigger threat than that of Canelo Alvarez. So basically what ego and these channels try to do they try to somewhat assassinate Canelo Alvarez's career. They're somewhat doing run-bys or, assassination attempts on his career by trying to constantly say, oh, he don't face anyone. He's facing people out their worst performances. He's facing people that are super old. And I'm not saying that, sometimes there's not a little bit of truth overall to certain things that they may say, but what I will say is this. Just to say that 100% of the time that Canelo Alvarez is always facing people out their worst performances, or every fighter that he fights is just completely old, that's just bogus. It is what it is. Now, if you wanted to say that some of the fighters that Canelo fought, maybe they were a bit older, like if you were to talk about Gennady Golovkin when he was 36, yeah, you could say that. But at the end of the day, there's certain older fighters that are at a very good point in their career. When Gennady Golovkin was 36 years old, he was a top 3 pound-for-pound fighter in almost every single list. Now, when Canelo fought Shane Mosley, that's something overall that is a little bit different, because Shane Mosley was not even ranked within the top 10 anymore, I believe, of the welterweight division. And if he was a bad top 10 at that point in time. But when he fought Miguel Cotto was the Ring Magazine middleweight champion. All right, so we overall have to give Canelo a certain amount of credit for that. When he fought Sergey Kovalev, he was coming off of 2 very good wins over 2 top 10 contenders within the light heavyweight division. And he was the WBO light heavyweight champion. Canelo was able to beat him. And that's not even me bringing up Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, blah, 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 all these other guys. All right, Danny Jacobs, Austin Trout, Erislandy Lara. Canelo Alvarez, you can tell, not only is he an all-time great fighter, but he has an all-time great resume. So it is what it is. But anyway.
This video, y'all better stay tuned. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Make sure you smash the like button. Also, subscribe to my channel for the latest and greatest in boxing. Now, Canelo Alvarez, he posted something, and I really wanted to talk about it because I thought it was pretty ironic, to be honest. Canelo Alvarez, on his verified story, he posted basically a meme suggesting that people they'll never be happy with his picks, right? Just what he's.
Well, Mr. Ego, he's not 100% wrong. Because like I said, I just reviewed a video by him yesterday where, of course, he was alleging that Canelo Alvarez, all in all, that he was apparently avoiding the Charlo fight. And didn't this dude just last week, and I reviewed a video for this, so I basically have proof of this. He just said that he did not want to see the Jermall Charlo fight. So Mr. Ego really doesn't know overall what he wants from Canelo Alvarez. Actually, I think that he really does know what he wants, and what he wants is just, he wants Canelo Alvarez to lose, because he's not really going to be happy with whoever Canelo Alvarez faces. It just is what it is.
That he says, so you guys see, it's on Canelo's page. On Canelo's page.
Like I said, it's almost like that girlfriend overall that to where she's done with you. She keeps bringing up fights when it comes down, and she's always complaining about what you're doing when it comes down to it. And the guy just wonders overall, what am I doing wrong? It's not the fact that all the time that she may be doing something wrong. It's just that, she plans overall to leave you overall, or she's planning to end that relationship before you even realize it. So she's overall trying to start shit with you, or overall she's trying to make the relationship a little bit more harsh. That way the relationship can break off. It's kind of the same thing here. Ego, when it comes down to it, there's going to be nothing that really appeases him, because the only thing that's going to be appeasing him is if Canelo Alvarez ends up suffering another loss. But we'll see what happens.
He says, I love this. And the meme says, if he fought Jermall Charlo, then he ducked Dimitri Bivol. If he fought Bivol, he ducked Charlo. If he fought Beterbiev, he ducked Bivol. If he fought Benavidez, he ducked Charlo. If he fought Charlo, he ducked Benavidez. If he fought Bivol, he ducked Beterbiev, so on and so forth. If he fought Beterbiev, he ducked Charlo. If he fought Benavidez, he ducked Beterbiev. And it says, my brain is fried. Canelo says he loves this. Now, to me, it's pretty stupid. And it's really weird.
I don't think it's really stupid at all, but it's stupid for you because, of course, you're one of those guys that really try to tear down Canelo Alvarez on a daily basis. But I think that Canelo Alvarez is right on the money. And I think that Canelo has realized that, once again, once you're the king of boxing, or once you are looked at overall as the main threat, there's going to be a lot of people that, yes, they may adore you, There's also going to be a lot of people that conspire against you. There's going to be a lot of people that try to tear you down. It was the same thing with Manny Pacquiao, Roy Jones Jr., Floyd Mayweather Jr. This is what has happened with all the most previous number one pound for pound fighters.
When people take situations that are otherwise not really complex and they try to make them harder.
Now, there are certain people in other sports to where they may overall be very, 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 very highly protected by the media. And that's not me saying that maybe Canelo here and there is not protected by the media, but boxing is a little bit different, when it comes down to it. But other sports, for example, someone like a Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal or a LeBron James or Serena Williams or Aaron Rodgers, or someone else of that sort, maybe even a Tom Brady. Those are some of the most highly protected athletes in all the sports when it comes down to it. What that means more than likely is that they have a value overall beyond what they just do in sports. They must overall be, have a role overall in something else besides just sports that maybe we don't personally know about. They use them overall probably to somewhat convince them of certain things to the masses, more than likely.
To understand, the reality is that Canelo Alvarez has fought mostly fair-skinned, Caucasian, Caucasoid fighters in recent memory. Eastern European fighters, Turkish fighters, and stayed away from certain styles. So,
Right, but what styles overall has he really stayed away from? And like I said, this is why you can't really trust a certain amount of these channels. Now, once again, I get the narrative of saying that, oh, well, Caucasian fighters, they're not usually that good. They're not usually that slick. I get what you're saying. But at the end of the day, we can't just take a look at things like that. Black fighter slick, Caucasian fighter not slick. Mexican fighter good, Caucasian fighter not good. Like we can't just take a look at things like that every single time. Because at the end of the day, Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, and Billy Joe Saunders, they were all legitimate A-grade champions. And I bet you money, like I said, if Demetrius Andrade or Jermall Charlo, had he beat any of these fighters, they would have been praising Jermall Charlo or overall Demetrius Boo Andrade had he defeated any of those fighters. And Mr. Ego, you were one of those guys that apparently said that you thought the Caleb Plant versus Canelo Alvarez fight was a very, very good fight. You thought that Caleb Plant had a very decent chance. And basically what you would have done if Caleb Plant would have won the fight would have been like, I shocked the world, Ego Stradamus strikes again. So, like I said, you're apparently supposed to be this boxing genius. You even thought overall that the Caleb Plant versus Canelo Alvarez fight was a good fight. So come on, let's stop bullshitting.
he can post memes and things like that, but to me, this is Canelo Alvarez trying to justify the reports that have come out that Canelo Alvarez is likely to fight Dimitri Bivol and then Triple G.
I'm not super duper hot on the Triple G fight, but I do somewhat see the appeal. I think that the zone overall does want that fight. They've wanted that fight for a few years now. So maybe Canelo Alvarez is going to get that out of the way. But Dimitri Bivol, I think, is a fantastic fight. I think that is a great fight. Because Dimitri Bivol, in my opinion, he's an even bigger threat to Canelo than what a Charlo or David Benavidez would be. And to be honest with you, I don't even think it's close. Dimitri Bivol, I think that if he got in the ring with David Benavidez and Jermall Charlo, especially if he was at his best, which at this point in time I believe that he would be, I think that Dimitri Bivol would tear those two to shreds. It just is what it is. I think that he has greater athleticism. I think that he has greater boxing ability. I think that he has higher boxing IQ. I think that he has more boxing skill. And all in all, I just think that he's the better fighter for those guys. Or I think that he's better than those guys, excuse me. I think that he's better for Canelo overall in terms of at least a real deal challenge. Now, in terms of a monetary perspective, do I think that maybe Dimitri Bivol is going to be as much of the popular option as Jermall Charlo or David Benavidez? Probably not, just because David Benavidez and Jermall Charlo, they're both American fighters. And of course, Jermall Charlo is a black American fighter, and David Benavidez is a Mexican American fighter. So, of course, those would be, highly sought after fights in terms of a monetary and pay per view perspective. But I think that the Dimitri Bivol fight is going to go very, very well as well. Because for those of us boxing purists overall, and I do count myself as a boxing purist, we know overall how much of a challenge this truly is.
He did. I made a video about it. Canelo came out and says, hey, nothing's official till I say we're still negotiating. At one point, rumor was that he could fight Jermall Charlo. Now, the problem lies for Canelo is he has a history of this and he has patterns. So Canelo could say whatever he wants, but the history shows. Canelo.
Right, but he has a pattern of what? A pattern of facing the best champions out there? Like, come on. Don't get me wrong. I would like to see the Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez fight just as good as the next. But I'm sorry, but Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez, to me, especially if we're comparing them to Dimitri Bivol, they're not better than Dimitri Bivol. They're not greater than him. They're not better than him. Dimitri Bivol, in my opinion, is debatably one of the top 20 pound-for-pound fighters in the whole sport of boxing. Would I put David Benavidez or Jermall Charlo there? Absolutely not.
Always makes it sound, him and his team, they make it sound like people are reaching and, hating. And
Well, to be fair, a lot of people like you are reaching. Because once again, you just stated that you didn't want to see the Jermall Charlo fight last week. Now all of a sudden you say, oh, well, Canelo should have fought Jermall Charlo. So it's like, dude, what do you want? You know what I mean? It's like this dude, all he wants is Canelo Alvarez to take another loss. That's all he wants. He's not going to be happy with anything. Like I said, not to compare it too many times to this, but like I said, he's like that one girlfriend that's already done with you. She basically bitches at you. She moans at you. When it comes on it, she basically starts fights with you. And, basically she's all of a sudden never happy anymore. And you start wondering, what am I doing wrong? What's wrong with her? It's not overall that, you can do much. It's just that, she already knows a relationship is ending anyway. She wants a relationship to end. Once a woman overall starts acting like that, the relationship is over. Once she's never happy anymore, and basically she starts starting fights out of nowhere and nagging you constantly, she basically, that relationship is over. It's kind of the same thing here. Boxing Ego overall is never going to be happy with Canelo. He's that one nagging, bitchy girlfriend when it comes down to it, because he's only going to be happy with Canelo Alvarez if he ends up suffering another loss. Or overall, if his career somewhat gets ended just like the relationship would get ended in that little analogy. But anyway.
You got to really start clearly defining what is hate, because a lot of facts.
Well, what is hate when it comes down to it, in my view, is basically never being happy overall with who a person fights, especially if you're a person that, like Mr. Ego here, you said, you know what, Canelo, if you were to fight this guy, it would be a great fight. If you were to face this guy, it would be a great fight. Or basically changing your energy on a constant basis. And Mr. Ego, you do that. And just like you say how you have breadcrumbs because YouTube records everything, I have breadcrumbs as well. And I can prove it as well. So it is what it is.
Get misconstrued in this social media era for hate. If you say something factual, then people don't investigate it further. They don't check it for consistency or fluidity.
Right, but I actually know shit about boxing. So I actually do check for consistency and fluidity. I check it overall for everything. I know overall what the hell I'm talking about. And you're not consistent. It just is what it is. Just last week you said that Canelo was, he was only facing Charlo because apparently he was at his weakest point. Now he's going to Dimitri Bivol, who in my opinion and most people's opinions is a decently bigger threat than Jermall Charlo. And all of a sudden you're saying, oh, well, he's avoiding Jermall Charlo. Once again, what do you want? Like I said, he's not happy. He's that nagging bitch ex-girlfriend when it comes down to it that just wants a relationship to end. He wants Canelo Alvarez's career to end. He wants him to lose once more. That is his main goal.
To make sure this is an accurate statement, they just lump it in with hate. But not everything that somebody says is about hate.
Well, I agree with you, but we have to take a look at his statement and basically say not only are you consistent with your energy, which you, Mr. Ego, are not, but when it comes down to it all in all, we also have to take a look at it and say, you know what, does this statement make sense? Now, if someone were to talk about Mikey Garcia or Gervonta Tank Davis, for example, and say, you know what, why the hell are you facing a Rolly Romero? Why the hell are you facing someone like a Sandor Martin when you could be facing someone that is much more highly ranked in the contendership? Why the hell are you facing those guys? That's something overall that makes sense. But if you're bitching and moaning and complaining about Canelo facing Caleb Plant or Callum Smith or Billy Joe Saunders, fighters that, in my opinion, they're pretty much on that same level with that of a Jermall Charlo. It just is what it is. I'm sorry, but to me, that's just not that big of a deal. And then Canelo goes on to face Dimitri Bivol. Dimitri Bivol, in my opinion, and excuse me, we can talk about certain opponents about how dangerous they are and yada, 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 yada. But listen, for those of us, once again, who are boxing purists, and for those of us overall that really know what the hell we're talking about, we can tell the difference between a fighter that actually is very, very dangerous and someone that really ain't going to be shit. When I take a look at Rolly Romero versus Gervonta Tank Davis, Royly Romero ain't gonna be shit for Gervonta Tank Davis. He isn't even gonna survive, in my opinion, past several rounds. He's lucky to even get past the first 3 rounds, to be honest with you. It just is what it is. Dimitri Bivol is actually a world-class fighter. Yes, we can take a look at these fighters and say, oh, they're Eastern European and they're Caucasianoids when it comes down to, or Caucasoids when it comes down to it, so they're not, usually as good, because take a look at the history of boxing. That's cool, but like I said, we have to know the difference between someone that is actually a legitimate fighter and someone overall that is just not that good of a fighter. So like I said, we can take a look at football, for example, and we can say that, you know what, usually the Caucasoids, or the Caucasoids, they usually dominate overall the quarterback position. But does that mean that Russell Wilson or Patrick Mahomes is not an all-time great QB? No, that doesn't mean that at all. So it just is what it is. So should I not count Tom Brady's, 2 Super Bowls, overall, or 2 of his Super Bowls because he won against black quarterbacks? But those black quarterbacks were clearly elite. It just is what it is. Anyway.
People aren't just saying things just to hate on every fighter. Like, that's not how the game works. And that's the same thing with Canelo Alvarez. He's posting memes.
Now, of course, there are certain people that would allege that, well, Canelo, yeah, he beat those guys. They were good, but they're not as good as Charlo or Benavidez. I would disagree. And the reason why I would disagree is because David Benavidez, in my opinion, he may be a little bit different compared to some of the other ones just because he's a natural light heavyweight. But when it comes to Dimitri Bivol, Bivol's not as popular as David Benavidez, but he's a person all in all that, in my opinion, he's more dangerous than David Benavidez. He's a bigger puncher. He's got better, possibly hand speed when it comes down to it. He's a better athlete. He's a better boxer. He's a smarter boxer. Overall, he has better skills in almost every single category compared to David Benavidez, and he's pretty much his own same size. So, like I said, we'll see all in all what happens with that. So if Canelo faces Dimitri Bivol, I can't be mad at that.
But the reality is you could have fought either Charlo brother at 154 when you were at Canelo weight of 155, and you did not do that. Then Jermall Charlo, after Canelo, moved up to 160. So from that point, Canelo could have fought Jermall Charlo, and Jermall Charlo kept winning WBC eliminators and became the mandatory for Canelo. And guess what? Canelo still didn't fight him. So
Right, but this is also the reality of the situation. What really pops Jermall Charlo off the map compared to some of the other opponents, even compared to a Caleb Plant? Is Jermall Charlo really above a Caleb Plant? I don't think he is. I don't think Jermall Charlo is even a better fighter than what Caleb Plant was. That's just my view on the situation. I know a lot of people would disagree, but I don't see Jermall Charlo even having the slickness of a Caleb Plant. He's just too stiff. He gets hit way too often. The thing that Jermall Charlo, of course, has over Caleb Plant is, of course, raw power, but what does that really mean when you don't really have that great a technique and you're not a person that is like a legendary puncher? You're not a person overall that is like Deontay Wilder or Gennady Triple G Golovkin to where one punch overall can usually end a fight. Don't get me wrong, Jermall Charlo, he has somewhat of that type of power, but only against the lesser class of fighters.
Or names like...
Or a fighter that may be decent grade, but has basically has a chin made out of styrofoam like a Julian J. Rock Williams.
Beterbiev and Bivol were in the picture. Jermall Charlo was always a name linked, and as a black American fighter. Another black American fighter that has been linked to Canelo for several years is Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade. So if you guys look at the chronological history, this is not hard to understand why people are clamoring for the same names. They want...
Right, but they're not always clamoring for the same names. Because a lot of the times when Canelo may be rumored to face one of those guys next, basically what do you guys say? Oh, well, this is how Canelo moves. These are his patterns because he's facing them off their worst performances. So once again, who do you want Canelo Alvarez to face? Do you want him to face Dimitri Bivol? Do you want him to face Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade, Jermall Charlo next? Who do you specifically want to see him face next, Ego? Because every fight that Canelo has possibly taken, you bitch and moan about it. It is what it is. In my opinion, Dimitri Bivol, he's a bigger threat than any of those possible guys, even more than a Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade. And like I said, I've never been personally as impressed with Demetrius Andrade as many other people, but I do understand, why people maybe think that he could be a threat to some of those fighters, because he is tall, lanky, and, he does have a little bit of slickness. But at the end of the day, Dimitri Bivol, in my opinion, he is the bigger threat than those fighters.
To see him, Bivol, that's the guy that they're saying he might fight. But fights with Jermall Charlo, this was a conversation well before people even knew who Bevo was. And it just so happened.
That's great, Eagle, but when it comes down to, you asked earlier what the definition of hate was. The definition of hate is basically you calling for a Jermall Charlo fight, and then there's rumors overall of a Jermall Charlo fight possibly happening, and then all of a sudden you say you don't want that fight to happen. You should put your money where your mouth is.
Is that Canelo Alvarez continues to pick on certain fighters. And that's the reality. You know, Caleb Plant, he's a white American man from Tennessee. And
Yes, he is a white man when it comes down to it. He's also a very skilled white man. It just is what it is. Not every not every Caucasian man, like I said, when it comes down to it, is just a bum. All right? It just is what it is. People say that, oh, Canelo's avoiding certain styles. What style is this in particular? Because people always try to say that, oh, he's avoiding the slicker styles. Well, David Benavidez and Jermall Charlo, they're not really that highly slick. David Benavidez, he's a come-forward fighter. He's going to come right at Canelo Alvarez. And I think once he feels Canelo Alvarez's power, I think he's going to start backing up, and I think it's going to be a hell of a time for him. Now, once again, that's just my opinion. That's just my breakdown. That doesn't mean the fight's going to happen like that. But at the end of the day, that's just personally what I see. But when people start to say that, oh, he's avoiding these slick, styles, Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez have never been slicksters. That's not what they are. It just is what it is. At least I don't see them that way. Jermall Charlo, in my opinion, is not even as slick as what a Billy Joe Saunders or Caleb Plant were. Now, does he have more power than them? Yeah, sure. But at the end of the day, what Jermall Charlo is to me, he's pretty much going to be another Danny Jacobs for Canelo Alvarez. I don't really see him overall having that legitimate of a chance. Now, Danny Jacobs did have a very competitive fight with Canelo, but I think that Canelo has even gotten better from the overall his Danny Jacobs fight.
Just as I predicted, Caleb Plant was to give Canelo the toughest fight out of his recent fights. That was...
Well, he pretty much gave Canelo Alvarez just as tough as a fight overall as Billy Joe Saunders did. Because both of those fighters, they had decently fast feet, and they were somewhat of slicksters. But at the end of the day, Canelo, he was too much for them.
His toughest. To me, he did better than other guys at 168. Yildirim. Guys like Rocky Fielding.
Well, of course, Yildirim and Rocky Fielding, because Rocky Fielding and Yildirim, those guys, they're not really anything to worry about. Now, if you were talking about those fighters, then it would make sense to say that those guys are really not the creme de la creme. But Caleb Plant and Callum Smith and Billy Joe Saunders, all those fighters that I just listed, they were very good European fighters or Caucasian, Caucasoid fighters. They were very, very good.
Guys like Billy Joe Saunders. I've seen people make different arguments. Some people said Billy Joe Saunders did better. How did he do better when he got knocked out sooner than Caleb Plant? And they both got knocked out.
Well, like I said, all in all, in my opinion, they pretty much did about the same. Billy Joe Saunders, in my opinion, got about 3 rounds in that Canelo fight. Caleb Plant, I think that he pretty much got the same. And maybe you can argue a 4th round in there, but Canelo was mainly dominating that fight.
Plant's going to continue fighting versus Billy Joe Saunders. He retired after the Canelo loss because it was such a, devastating loss. And I guess he felt he had nothing left in the tank after that. So these statements don't really make sense to me. So Canelo, he can continue.
Well, of course not, because not only are you not that intelligent, but you don't want to get it. When it comes down to it anyway.
Posting memes, but the theory and what people are saying is no different than people from his own country. In Mexico, you have legends like Nacho Beristain of the Romanza Gym, Juan Manuel Marquez, Eric Morales, all these guys, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. at a point in time. They all had the same criticism. Chavez Sr.
No, Chavez Sr. has not really had the same criticism of Canelo. The only thing Chavez Sr. has really said is that Canelo overall, he's moving up the weight classes and maybe he's on extra supplements. But Marquez and Morales and De La Hoya, is no offense against them, but we all know why we all know why they are saying the things about Canelo why they are. There's no offense against Marquez, but he's been hating on Canelo Alvarez for the past several years. It just is what it is. Marquez is just that one dude that with Canelo Alvarez, he's never liked him. He's never going to like him. It is what it is.
He has kind of backed up a little bit and, said more favorable things. at least what the interviews I've seen recently about Canelo Alvarez, but there was a point in time where he was even critical. And the reality is the reason people are critical is because Canelo has the ability to fight anyone in boxing, no questions asked, and he has this type of power, yet he wants to fight a 40-year-old Golovkin that last time they fought, he already beat. This poses many...
Well, I would somewhat agree with you there. I don't think that the Golovkin fight is that great of a fight, but I somewhat see the appeal. I would not necessarily mind a third fight just to get it out of the way. But Canelo, in my opinion, after that, he would have to go after an A-grade boxer. Or, Gennady, you can maybe still debate his A-grade, but I don't know. I think that he's about B plus to A minus if he is A-grade. I don't think that Gennady is anywhere near the same of what he used to be. But we'll see what happens. DAZN, I think, really wants that fight, so we'll see. But after that, of course, if he does defeat Dimitri Bivol, then of course he would have to go out there after probably either Artur Beterbiev or Benavidez or Jermall Charlo. But we'll see what happens.
Problems because, for example, Gennady Golovkin, if he couldn't win a judge's scorecard when people thought he won at least the first fight, some people even thought that Triple G, hey, no, guys, hey, Max, big drama, guys, never, right? Some people even thought Triple G won the second fight. And people felt he couldn't get a fair shake in the first two fights. What happened at Golovkin's normal middleweight weight, at the weight that he's used to fighting at, what type of...
Why do people keep mentioning this point that he has to move up? Has Canelo Alvarez not moved up 4 consecutive weight classes? Like, what is this argument? If Canelo Alvarez went up to 175 and fought Dimitri Bivol and fought Artur Beterbiev, and if Canelo Alvarez lost, would he go say, oh, well, you know what, we have to give, Canelo Alvarez some credit here because Canelo overall, he was fighting at a weight that he's not naturally used to. Like, what? What is this stupid-ass point? Like, that makes no sense. Like, if you're going to be an all-time great boxer, you should be willing overall to win fights in multiple weight classes. It just is what it is. But Gennady, unfortunately for him, I just don't think that he's at a great point in his career. But we'll see what happens.
Chance does Gennady Golovkin have against Canelo Alvarez at a weight that's foreign to him? He hasn't been fighting at 168. Canelo has.
What the hell does that matter for if he's not facing an actual 168-pounder? He's facing Canelo, who he's already fought twice, who hasn't really gained any weight. Canelo is a person that has pretty much contained his own natural weight. Like, come on, dude. Like, what kind of stupid-ass point are you even trying to make? That just doesn't even make any sense.
Canelo also recorded a knockout at 175, and he's younger.
God, this thing will not pause. Anyway, but like I said, it's going to hinder Golovkin basically because, he has to go up in weight and, like, it's not like he's going to be drained. It's like, what are you talking about, dude?
They won last time. So if Canelo is extremely hard to beat on the judges' scorecards, then to me, this is out of the question to even surmise that Gennady Golovkin can win this fight or will win the fight, in the rematch. It's not a bet I would be willing to take. So Canelo is...
I agree with you, Ego, but then where's that same energy when it comes to Gervonta Tank Davis and Rolly Romero? Because when that fight was announced, and that's a fight that's not even worth watching, in my opinion, when it comes down to it, you basically were like, oh, well, this is a great fight, and all that. So, come on, man. We know how you roll. It is what it is. Anyway.
Making it sound crazy. No, people don't want to, they're not going to say you're ducking anybody, depending on who you fight. The masses just want to see you in challenging fights and fights that they've been wanting to see for a while. Benavidez...
Well, right, but when it comes down to it, that would be different if you're a Gervonta Tank Davis and you fight literally the bottom of the barrel, usually repeatedly. But when you're a Canelo Alvarez that usually faces legitimate champions, then it's a little bit different.
His name has been there for a while, and Canelo doesn't pick these guys. If you look at Canelo's history, Canelo, I can pull it up, Y'all don't want that. Y'all don't want that.
Go ahead, pull it up. What are you going to pull up? That Canelo Alvarez overall has fought repeated champions? Like, come on.
Canelo Alvarez fights guys off of recent bad performances. I promise.
No, he does not. Just stop overall when it comes down to it. Once again, you have so many people overall that make this stupid-ass point. I was debating this one dude in the comment section the other day. when it came down, and he was saying, well, say what you want, but Canelo's fought a lot of people that are over like 36 years old, blah, blah, blah. Like, this dude had no idea what the fuck he was even talking about. And he was basically saying, like, oh, he'll never be revered as Chavez Sr. because Chavez Sr., he was 89-0 and all sort of bullshit. And listen, once again, all respect to Chavez Sr., don't get me wrong. But when we really take a look at Chavez Sr.'s record, did Chavez Sr. really beat a whole lot of first ballot Hall of Famers just straight off the bat? I mean, it just is what it is. Don't get me wrong. He has some great wins in his career. And I'm not all too familiar with all the great wins that he had, but the two great wins that I know that he had were over Meldrick Taylor and Hector Macho Camacho. Were those really fighters that we would consider in our top 30 or top 40 of all time? I wouldn't. Those are two fighters that pretty much lost almost every big fight in their career. It just is what it is, and there's a few others. Don't get me wrong. Chavez Sr. was a great fighter, but when people bring up this shit of overall, oh well, he got to 89-0 and Canelo will never be there, dude. He got to 89-0 partially because he was fighting fighters that had like 3 fights in the record and were like 1-2. Like, you know what I mean? It's the same shit overall with Sugar Ray Robinson. So many people take a look at Sugar Ray Robinson and they're like, oh yeah, well Floyd Mayweather got undefeated and all these other fighters, but they'll never beat 250 and something like that. It's like, dude, that's cool, but Sugar Ray Robinson did shit that you can't do today. It just is what it is.
Shoot, if you look at the guys Canelo fought, the guys weren't coming off sensational performances in their last 2, maybe 3 fights. Caleb.
Oh, come on, dude. Just stop. Callum Smith, when it came down, and from what I heard, he wasn't overly impressive against John Ryder, but he still was the Ring Magazine champion. Like, just stop, dude. It just, it is what it is. Like I said, if we're going to make that point, excuse me, we can really make that point about several other boxers in the history of boxing. It just is what it is. We can allege this with so many boxers. All right? It just is what it is. Bottom line is this. When Canelo beat Sergey Kovalev was coming off of 2 very, very good wins for the light heavyweight division. He had a little bit of trouble in the Anthony Yard fight. I had the same dude tell me who was debating me overall about Canelo. He said, oh, Sergey Kovalev was getting worked by Anthony Yard. No, he was not getting worked. He had 1 round overall where he was in a decent amount of trouble. Then the rest of the fight, he pretty much whooped his ass. It just is what it is. So Sergey Kovalev was a decent opponent. Miguel Cotto overall was coming off of multiple knockout victories. All right, when it came down to, sure, over a little bit of weight-drained opponents, but Miguel Cotto was still looked at as a very decent point in his career. Austin Trout was coming off of a win overall over Miguel Cotto. Erislandy Lara, I believe, was coming off of a win either over Alfredo Angulo or Austin Trout when he fought Canelo. When it came overall to Billy Joe Saunders, he whooped up on Martin Murray. All right, when it came down to it. And when he fought overall someone like, let me see here, Caleb Plant, he was coming off of multiple impressive performances over Caleb Truax, who ended up overall, I believe, one point in time defeating the former 168, supremacist there, James DeGale, when it came down to the boxing supremacist there, James DeGale. All right, the former number 1 of that division. All right, when he fought overall, I believe, Gennady Triple G Golovkin, he was coming off of multiple good performances. Like when he defeated Danny Jacobs. Danny Jacobs was coming off of a split decision over Sergey Derevyanchenko. And in my opinion, Danny Jacobs won that fight. Now, Sergey, in my opinion, he's not really that great of a fighter. But at the time, he was undefeated. And overall, he was a tough cookie to beat. So, like I said, this narrative that Canelo, he only fights people after worst performances, it's horseshit. It just is what it is.
Plant. His fight.
Like I said, you can tell all in all when someone is completely washed up or someone all in all is not the same fighter. And Ego, if that's your point anyway, why the hell do you care if Canelo faces Jermall Charlo next or not? Because Jermall Charlo, apparently, according to you, is coming off of his worst performance. So then why would he face him next? Wouldn't it be better if he faces Dimitri Bivol, someone who's probably a better fighter anyway, and someone that's coming off of more impressive performances? Like, come on.
He was on a long layoff, and he fought Caleb Truax right before, and it went 12 rounds. And he busted up.
Yeah, went 12 rounds, but what you're also not stating is that Caleb Truax, not too long before then, he was a champion. Because he defeated James DeGale, I believe, by knockout. Or if it wasn't by knockout, then it was by decision.
Caleb Truax. But this was in January 2021, and you see he didn't fight until, 10 months later against Alvarez, and he was coming off of the Truax performance.
Yes, but that's not an excuse. And if you are going to use that excuse, now, if you're talking about a 2 or 3 year layoff, then in my opinion, you have something. Like if you're talking about Manny Pacquiao versus Yordenis Ugas or something of that sort, then you have something. But when it comes down to it, so many of these people, they always try to use this year-long layoff shit, but they won't use it for Terrence Bud Crawford when he defeated Yuri Gamboa. They won't use it for a fighter all in all that, they tend to like. So just cut the bullshit.
A lot of people criticize him, including Anthony Durrell and fans, saying he should have looked better. Same thing with Billy Joe Saunders.
But Canelo, he didn't fight overall, I believe, for a very, very long time, right before he fought Sergey Kovalev. And according to these people, he he overall didn't look super duper good in that fight when it came down to it. And basically, are they going to use the same excuse? Are they going to use the same excuse and say, oh, well, Canelo, we have to give him, a little bit of a break because he was on a long layoff? They're not going to do it. It's like, come on, man. This is why overall these channels annoy me so much. They're so full of shit. Like, they're just so full of shit. Anyway.
Saunders, you guys could look at it. Billy Joe Saunders looked mid with Martin Murray in 2020, and then he didn't fight until he fought Canelo the very next year. Like, so let's say 6 months later. Before that.
Right, but 6 months later, that's the deal breaker. A fighter is supposed to fight overall 2 times a year, and you're bitching and complaining because he fought him 6 months later? Like, come on.
He fought Marcelo Esteban Corceres, who made him look horrible, and this was on the KSI Logan Paul card. So these are the 2 fights right before Canelo fought him. This is not impressive stuff. I don't care if he was
So then what you're saying is that Canelo Alvarez should not face Jermall Charlo next. He should wait overall until he looks a little bit more impressive. Or are you still going to bitch that Canelo is not facing, Jermall Charlo? Like I said, these people even know overall that excuse is not going to work, because I reviewed a video by Dante's Boxing Nation not too long ago, and he even admitted it himself. He said that if you're Canelo Alvarez, even if Jermall Charlo was coming off of a bad performance, you would have to expect that the best version of Jermall Charlo is going to come into that fight. So basically, what is that him admitting? What was that him admitting? Basically, that excuse ain't going to fly. And that overall, that excuse of, oh, he's coming off of his worst performance. Listen, unless you're talking about a fighter that is completely washed up, a fighter all in all, yeah, they may have just not great performances here and there. But if they're a fighter that is a legitimate threat or a legitimate contender, that's not going to be the deal breaker.
Champion, there's multiple ways. Avni Yildirim, same thing. Avni Yildirim was on a loss in a...
Yeah, but Avni Yildirim, he's not shit. Avni Yildirim, ain't really that great of a fighter. But when you talk about Callum Smith, Caleb Payne, Billy Joe Saunders, he defeated all those guys when they were at the prime of their career.
2-year layoff. He lost to Anthony Durrell, as you guys should be able to see on the screen.
Like I said, Avni Yildirim and Rocky Fielding, they're not to be compared with Callum Smith, Caleb Payne, or Billy Joe Saunders because they're not in the same league. But they try to put him in the same league because, once again, they're trying to promote that narrative of, oh, well, he's just facing these, basic Caucasian fighters. Some of these Caucasian fighters will box your ass off. Like Billy Joe Saunders overall and Caleb Plant. And it is what it is. Anyway. And Callum Smith was a person who was a Ring Magazine champion, had power overall like a light heavyweight, and a person that was decently bigger than Canelo. And overall had wins over Rocky Fielding, knockout wins over Rocky Fielding and George Groves.
Fought in 2 years. Why would I be impressed that Canelo beat him? Just because the WBC or whoever said he was the mandatory. He was, again, hadn't fought since February 23rd, 2019, and then he fought Canelo in 2021 in February 27th. So that's literally 2 years. It was 2 years. So that's not impressive to me. Right? So Caleb Smith, he was coming off of
Right, but Ego, the fact that we know that you're hating when it comes down to, or how do I know that you're hating compared to overall other things? The reason why I know that you're hating is because, once again, it's a little bit different with you. Because, like I said, basically you're like, oh, well, he's not doing anything impressive. Right, but you're not impressed with anything overall that Canelo does. You're like Juan Manuel Marquez. Any fighter that he fights, it's like, oh, well, you know what, I wasn't really that impressed. Oh, he needs to do better. Oh, with this. Oh, with that. Oh, he's fighting people overall that are too old. He's fighting people coming off their worst performances. So it's like, come on, dude.
A performance where he got booed.
Because now you're bitching overall that you want the Jermall Charlo fight to happen, but just before you were saying all in all that you didn't want to see it happen. So what do you want to see?
His own home state, his own home country against John Ryder. And he was on a long layoff. Look. John Ryder fight was in 2019, in November 23rd, 2019, and people thought he lost that fight. And guess what? Canelo fought him in December, so clearly a year and a month after the John Ryder performance. So not only was he on a long layoff, a year and a month layoff before fighting Canelo, he also shouldn't have been a champion because many people, including a lot of the fans in...
Well, once again, like I said, I would have to see the fight. I'm not sure. But there's a lot of people that would claim certain robberies in certain fights. That doesn't mean all in all that is true. But like I said, I would have to see it.
Callum Smith.
But no, Canelo has to get credit over Callum Smith. And the reason why that is because if Jermall Charlo or David Benavidez overall were to fight him, you know overall that they would have gave him credit. Or not David Benavidez, but Demetrius Bubu Andrade.
His backyard believed that this was the guy that lost and he should have been a champion. And that was his own hometown crowd. So that's kind of like Teofimo when he said he won against George Kambosos. When your own hometown crowd is booing you, then you know you probably didn't do as good as you think. Same thing with Sergey Kovalev. Kovalev was coming off the Anthony Yarde performance in a very quick turnaround. And I heard there were rehydration clauses. This stuff is not impressive. So Canelo...
So this stuff is not impressive. So what if Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Bubu Andrade was doing this? So you give Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Bubu Andrade credit for defeating bottom-of-the-barrel opponents. But Canelo was actually facing legitimate champions, and apparently it's not impressive stuff. Once again, I would get it if it looked like he was clearly picking the weakest of the weak, like what Mikey Garcia or Gervonta Tank Davis have done. But that's not what he's doing.
Alvarez can overcomplicate it and make it look like no matter who he fights, he'll never get credit. You're not Floyd Mayweather.
It's not really overcomplicating it when it comes down to it. It's just the truth. There's no overcomplicating, about it. It's just Canelo Alvarez, he realizes that when you're the king, when it comes down to it, there's going to be a certain amount of people that have assassination attempts on you. So it is what it is.
People really found a way to hate on Floyd Mayweather, and he was fighting Adrian Broner, lost to Marcos Maidana, and was nearly stopped. That's when Floyd fought Marcos Maidana. So Marcos Maidana was at a peak level of
right, but Maidana, he was a Latino fighter. Floyd Mayweather Jr. should have been facing the slick black fighters. Maidana already had a few losses in his career. Like you see overall how easy this is overall to make bullshit excuses overall about each and every fight. If I really overall wanted to bitch and moan about Floyd Mayweather Jr., here, let me do it right now. Let me almost discredit almost every single one of Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s fights. Well, yeah, he fought Ricky Hatton, but Ricky Hatton's a Caucasian fighter. So he can't get credit over him. That's number one. He can't get credit over Juan Manuel Marquez because Marquez already had a few losses in his career. He can't get credit overall over Manny Pacquiao because he already been knocked out a few times by the time he fought him. He can't get credit over Miguel Cotto because Miguel Cotto was already knocked out a couple times before he fought him. He can't get credit over Zab Judah because Zab Judah was already lost. He already got knocked out when it came down to it. He can't get credit over Carlos Baldomir because Baldomir already lost. He can't get credit over Oscar De La Hoya because he got knocked out by Bernard Hopkins right before then. He can't get credit overall over a certain amount. DeMarcus Chop Corley, because DeMarcus Corley lost before him, I believe. Like, you see overall how easy this is? He can't get credit over Arturo Gatti, because Arturo Gatti already got knocked out multiple times. My point being is this. We can overall allege the sun, the moon, and the stars about whatever we want to. But is it logical? Is it objective? And these points overall about Canelo Alvarez, they're not logical. They're not objective. And I understand a certain amount of people, they're saying, oh, well, sometimes he's fought people coming off a layoff, blah, blah, blah. Listen, dude, Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s and Manny Pacquiao's career, some of these other fighters' career, they're not 100% squeaky clean either. And if you're going to degrade Canelo Alvarez's resume, then it's time all in all that you do it with every single other fighter as well. You keep the same energy with everybody else. So if you don't give Canelo Alvarez credit for defeating Caleb Plant or Callum Smith, don't give Mayweather credit for defeating Manny Pacquiao or Miguel Cotto. Don't give him credit for beating those fighters, because those fighters already lost. So it is what it is.
Dangerousness, and that's when Floyd picked him. Shane Mosley had just beaten Antonio Margarito. That was a peak performance where he wasn't supposed to beat Margarito, and he destroyed Margarito by stoppage, right?
Right, but dude, come on. Canelo Alvarez, when it comes down to it, there's been some fights all in all that happened, overall because they were maybe not coming out with their best performances. But come on, Caleb Plant overall was at the best point in his career. You even thought that Caleb Plant had a decent chance. So you're pretty much caught in your own lie. It is what it is. All right? And when he fought Billy Joe Saunders was still the WBO super middleweight champion. He was undefeated. So let's stop the bullshit.
Golovkin, that's another person. if you do the rematch in September as planned, Gennady Golovkin has not fought one time since 2021, and then now he's going to take a fight that got rescheduled, I think, for they're trying to fight Ryota Murata in March, and then he's going to have to come right back and fight Canelo at a weight. If he beats Murata, he's going to have to fight Canelo at a weight he's not fought at 168, while Canelo gets time to rest.
Once again, I don't know why people keep bringing up that point for. Like, do you think this point would ever be brought up with Canelo Alvarez? That, oh, well, Canelo, you know, he's fighting at a weight that he's never fought at before. They wouldn't give a shit about that. Like, come on.
In between, you know, from now to May. I mean, or September or whatever, from May to September. It's just, it's not impressive stuff, people. You can say whatever you want. So Canelo, he could post.
No, what Canelo has done is highly impressive. Somehow you think all in all that this stuff that Canelo has done is not impressive, but you think that Gervonta Tank Davis defeating the bottom of the barrel like Mario Barrios and Isaac Pitbull Cruz, you apparently overall give him high praise for that. So once again, Ego, we know how you roll. It is what it is.
All the memes he wants to make it look like it's hard to understand, but truthfully, it's not. It's very easy to.
No, it's not hard to understand at all. Basically, what's going on is that Canelo Alvarez is the king of boxing. If he was a black fighter, you would treat him completely differently.
Understand why he gets the.
There's really no complicated thing about it. If you're a person with any sort of intelligence, you can see all in all why Ego talks about Canelo Alvarez the way that he does.
Criticism that he's garnered. And it's because of the timing, the politics, the, you know, handcrafting and selecting opponents at given times when it only benefits you instead of just fight. Like David Benavidez, none of this stuff that I've said applies to him. David Benavidez, he probably knocked out his last several opponents.
David Benavidez, when he came down, did not look super duper impressive in his last couple of performances either. It just is what it is. In my opinion, I've never really been 100% overly impressed with David Benavidez, but it is what it is. That's not me saying that I would not want to see the fight. But if you're going to make the same argument, I mean, David Benavidez, he pretty much just looked as impressive in his last fight as what Billy Joe Saunders' last fight did. I mean, the only difference is that David Benavidez got the knockout. But Billy Joe Saunders, of course, he was never known as a knockout artist.
Right.
Like, people try to make the point to where, oh, well, he didn't have that impressive of a performance against Martin Murray before he fought Canelo. That's bullshit. If you watched the Billy Joe Saunders versus Martin Murray fight, Billy Joe Saunders literally beat his ass every single round. He even hurt him a couple of times.
Look, I'll show you.
Now, in my opinion, Martin Murray, he's not really someone all in all that, you know, is a grade. But he is a person all in all that has usually fought some of the best fighters out there. And Billy Joe Saunders was able to completely embarrass him.
This is an example of why Canelo doesn't get the credit. So David Benavidez is 25-0, and he has 22 knockouts. There's nothing to complain about. There's nothing that you can say. You can't say, oh, he's coming off a bad performance. He's been destroying everybody. Only 3 people have.
He's been destroying everyone. He's been destroying bums. But it is what it is. And really, he doesn't even look overly impressive against them either. But it is what it is. Anyway.
Not been knocked out. So he's younger than Canelo. He's big. His KO percentage is 88%. He's been a pro since 2013, so he has years in the game. He's taller than Canelo. He has long arms. He has a ferocious style. He has 3 TKOs in a row, then 4, 5 actual KOs against Anthony Durrell and J. Leon Love. So what was that, 5? He hasn't had a unanimous decision since, Ron Gavril in 2018. And this fight.
Right, that's cool, but at the end of the day, like I said, what does that really mean when you're facing bottom of the barrel opponents? It just is what it is.
He busted Gavril up in the rematch.
I understand overall, you know, what he's saying. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry. I just don't take a look at David Benavidez as the next big thing to beat Canelo. I just don't see it. And I think that Dimitri Bivol, if he comes at his best, I think that he's going to be a much bigger threat to Canelo than what David Benavidez ever would be. Because I just don't see David Benavidez having that boxing ability.
Because the first fight he got dropped. But in his rematch, I think he broke Ron Gavril's jaw. And that was in 2018, so that was a couple years ago. So.
Right, but Ron Gavril, he ain't shit. You want to talk about a Caucasian fighter overall, Caucasoids overall, or Caucasoids that really aren't that great of fighters. Ron Gavril ain't shit. Like Ron Gavril, he now let me give David Benavidez credit. He had a very tough time with Ron Gavril overall in the first fight. Overall, and then in the rematch, I believe he did a lot better. So I'll give you that amount of credit. But no one takes a look at Ron Gavril and it's like, oh my god, he beat Ron Gavril. Like no one takes a look at him like that. Like, come on.
He's on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fight knockout streak, mostly knockouts, growing and confident. I mean, what are we talking about? Unlike Billy Joe Saunders, who was one fight removed of looking horrible versus Marcelo Esteban Corceres, as I stated. Checkmate. Hopefully you guys like the video. Subscribe to the channel.
Checkmate. Anyways, when it comes down to it, but like I said, these guys are never going to be happy with whoever Canelo Alvarez faces. Because like I said, they realize that Canelo is the king. And when you're the king, yes, you may have a lot of people over that door. You may have a lot of people that like you. You're also going to have a lot of people that don't like you, that wish over that you were not in power. And they know that Canelo Alvarez is in power. And that is the reason overall why they say these things against him. Because, and there's going to be a lot of people that come here and say, oh, well, he was speaking, certain facts when they came down to, overall, why don't you just overall acknowledge it? Listen, what I'm saying is this. I'm not saying that everything that Ego is saying is just 100% false. But at the end of the day, if you're going to have that same energy with Canelo, you have to have that same energy with every fighter. And like I said, if you think all in all that he's overall just facing the weakest of the weak, why don't you keep the same energy with Gervonta Tank Davis? Why don't you keep the same energy overall with Terrence Bud Crawford or some of the other fighters that overall you apparently, overall, you're a person that apparently is factual. So why do you not keep the same energy with other fighters, especially if your own complexion? All of a sudden it's different. So like I said, that's how you know overall that Ego, when it comes down to it, he hates Canelo Alvarez. It just is what it is.
I'm the best in the business. The future.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. I just thought that would be very particularly interesting. But thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.